Okay. Can't seem to get. Hi everyone. We're just going to give a couple of seconds to let everybody join. Okay, right. Okay, so I think we'll get started. So hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is, wherever you are. I hope that you're well. Welcome to the Conservation Together at Home webinar series. My name is Eleanor Schofield and I'm the chair of the Heritage Science Group. A few bits before I introduce our speakers for today. If you are talking about this on social media, please use the hashtag Conservation Together at Home. This talk will be recorded and shortly afterwards it will be available both on the Book and Paper website and also on the Heritage Science website. We're all using our home IT and internet connection, so please bear with us if there are any issues. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's a Q&A box. If you have any questions, if you put them in there, then I will field them at the end. And just a couple of bits about the next talk. So the next one in the overall series is tomorrow at 4 o'clock. It's Lewis Porter, who's talking about albumen printing the scanned negatives of Victorian photographer John Thompson. And the next in the Heritage Science series is next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. It will be Susan Bruvac and Fabrizio Andriulo, who are from the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo. They work on the Oterberg project, and they will be talking about alkaline nanoparticles for deacidifying alum-treated wood. So you can find all the details about those of how to join on the website. So I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, who is Caitlin Southwick, who is the founder and executive director of Key Culture and Sustainability in Conservation. And she's going to be talking to us today about sustainability and cultural heritage, our past and our future. I should also just mention as well, you'll see we have another panelist here, Natalie Brown, who is also on the Heritage Science Committee for ICON, and she's going to be joining in the Q&A section at the end. So for now, Natalie and I will turn ourselves off, mute and turn our videos off, and I will hand over to Kate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellie. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. It's an honor to be here, of course, in our Together at Home series. So my name is Caitlin Southwick. I am the founder and executive director of Key Culture and Sustainability in Conservation. And today we're going to be talking about sustainability. So I am going to share my screen now. We're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation, and then I will leave questions, time for questions at the end. So without further ado, here we get going. Brilliant. All right. So I'd like to start off, of course, by giving a quick introduction. My background is actually in art conservation. I have a doctorate from the University of Amsterdam in stone conservation. I have been working in stone conservation and conservation actually in general in Europe and all over the world actually for 9 years now. And when I was a master's student many, many years ago, I started realizing that conservation as we practice it can be quite unsustainable. It has quite a negative environmental impact. And to me, it didn't really make a lot of sense to be conserving our heritage at the expense of our planet. So I wanted to find a solution for how we could practice in a more environmentally friendly way. And so I started sustainability and conservation. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to Key Culture and SIC, but very quickly I'm going to give a little bit of background there because it can be a little confusing since we have two organizations. So Sustainability and Conservation was the original organization, as I mentioned, and we focus really on environmental responsibility within the field of art conservation. So we'll talk more about what that means today. And Key Culture was founded through my work in other areas of cultural heritage. So I realized that it's not just conservation that has this issue of wanting to be sustainable but not knowing how. It's actually all of cultural heritage. So we'll talk a little bit more about Key Culture as well right now. So Key Culture was founded last year, 2019, as an official nonprofit organization based here in Amsterdam. And Key Culture really focuses on tangible actions. It's how to be sustainable. So we all understand that this is an issue. We all are here because we care about sustainability. We want to be sustainable, but how do we start even doing this? So this is what Key Culture was founded in order to address. So we focus on sustainability from all lenses. That includes environmental as well as social sustainability. And we focus on cultural heritage in all fields. So everything from conservation to curators, to archaeologists, to architects, anything that has to do with cultural heritage, we will find solutions for sustainability. So I started Key Culture when, after I had begun working with SIC, and I was then invited to be on the working group on sustainability for ICOM. So I've been in, that's International Council of Museums. So I've been in that capacity. I've been the secretary for their working group for the past 2 years, and I will be the secretary for an additional 2 years there. And it really started to dawn on me that indeed, there's a lot of incredible work going on. And there are so many people who are passionate and dedicated to this issue, but it still is very sporadic, and there still was a issue with people communicating and working together. So the idea behind Key Culture is really to create an international, global, unified approach to addressing sustainability as the cultural heritage profession. So our mission is really twofold. The first part is to make the cultural heritage sector more sustainable. So that has to do with greening operations, education and empowerment, providing solutions, providing more streamlined communication platforms. But how can we as a sector be more sustainable? And then the second part of it is really, how do we use the influential position of cultural heritage to make holistic change, to drive real behavior, cultural shifts in our society? So how can we use cultural heritage to educate our visitors and educate the public about sustainability? It's quite amazing the influence and the capacity that we have as cultural heritage professionals and as cultural heritage institutions. We are one of the last institutions of real trusted learning and knowledge. I mean, when you walk into a museum and you see a painting, you don't question what it says on there. You believe that, you know, the description is the truth. And with social media and fake news and all of this different chaos going on in the world, people don't know who to trust, but they can trust us. And that's why we have so much power. And that's the power that we want to harness in order to drive sustainable education and solutions. So one of the big things about Key Culture is, as I said, we're not here to reinvent the wheel. We are here to find solutions to the questions. But our big thing, of course, is to connect people internationally, to connect cultural heritage networks, cultural heritage institutions, but also to work outside of cultural heritage, to start working with sustainable engineers and climate scientists and professionals who actually have background in sustainable solutions, so they can help us find win-win solutions for cultural heritage. So I'm very quickly just going to mention a couple of the programs that we're developing at Key Culture. One is our Digital Resource Center, where basically we're creating a one-stop shop for all things sustainability in cultural heritage. So this is going to include everything from literature and projects and programs to case studies, best practices, everything that you need to know about sustainability in cultural heritage will finally be in one place. So this is your hub of hubs, if you will. So this is going to be coming soon. We were hoping to launch in the fall, and we'll see how things go. But so far, so good. And we've been spent about a year now collecting all of the resources and information. So now it's just a matter of getting it into a searchable format for everyone. But please keep an eye out for the Digital Resource Center. And the other big program that we're developing is called the Sustainability Ambassador Program. So this is really a way to empower cultural heritage practitioners in any capacity, at any level, anywhere in the world, to start engaging with sustainability. As we said, we're focusing on the how. I have so many people that come up to me and say, you know, Caitlin, I would love to be sustainable, but I don't know where to begin, and my boss isn't super into it, and I, can't get anywhere with this program. How do I start? And so the ambassador program is really the driving force behind starting to engage with sustainability. So what we've done actually is we've created a series of key books, which are basically how-to manuals on how to be sustainable. And so these books are themed. The first 3 that will be launching in January of next year are energy, waste and materials, and social sustainability. And then we have 4 more that you can see here that will be in January of 2022. So those will be additional resources for ambassadors. And the ambassador program itself includes things like regional mentors, so people who the ambassadors can call in and find out information, and local partnerships and ask questions and get support. Of course, we have the whole Key Culture Network there as well, but we also provide carbon tracking tools, accreditation and training, other resources such as communication guides and PR kits so you can publicize what you're doing, and really just finding ways to empower everyone to be able to start practicing more sustainably. So this will be launching, as I mentioned, in January of 2021, and our registration will be opening in July. So keep an eye out for that. So SIC is probably what most of you have heard of. SIC, or Sustainability in Conservation, is still a branch of Key Culture. So it's still a separately operational organization, but it's under the Key Culture umbrella. And once again, I felt that it was incredibly important to keep SIC as it was, because as conservators, we know that we have our own unique set of issues and our own unique needs. So we really focus at SIC on environmental responsibility within the field of conservation and restoration. So we're really looking for solutions, greener practices, and once again, more communication and education. So SIC has a lot of different programs and projects. We run the Student Ambassador Program, which is similar to the Sustainable Ambassador Program, but for university and training level conservators. We also are in the works of releasing an academic journal, which will be solely on research dedicated to sustainability. Hopefully you have seen our tips and tricks in our social media. And we also are developing regional branches, which can identify more specific needs of conservators in specific countries. We also are currently putting together a resource center, which will be similar to the Key Culture Resource Center, but of course, just niche market only for us conservators. And we're also including the GE tree, which is actually a decision-making chart to help conservators find more sustainable alternatives in their treatments. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about the S word. What is sustainability? Sustainability can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But when I ask people what they think when they hear sustainability, I usually hear making positive change. Maybe that it's being environmentally responsible. Maybe it means being socially responsible. Something that's important for the future. Well, one of my favorite things about sustainability in context is something Henry McGee says. He says, sustainability is doing good without doing harm. And I think this is something that really can relate to us. So as conservators, we think, we're doing good. We are conserving our planet. We're conserving our cultural heritage for the future. We are, this is obviously something that's integral to our species and very important to us in so many different ways. But we need to be doing it in a more sustainable way, because the way we're currently doing it is causing harm to the planet. So how can we as conservators do the good, wonderful things that we do without causing harm? So just very, very quickly, sustainability in the current context of its meaning was first used by the Club of Rome in 1972. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Brundtland Report, but sustainability basically now in the context of how we're using it today is related to Agenda 2030, which is something that the United Nations cooked up in 2015 along with the Paris Agreement. And Agenda 2030 revolves around basically how to create a sustainable future. So what is the framework we can use for achieving a sustainable future? and they put together the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. And the SDGs were created to provide the pathway to a sustainable future. But the SDGs were really made for policymakers. If you look at the targets within the SDGs, it's really made for governments and for people who are running countries rather than for individuals. So at SIC and Key Culture, we created the Cultural Heritage Goals, which are basically a translation of the Sustainable Development Goals for cultural heritage professionals. So we are currently at Key Culture running a professional development workshop series where we get really into the cultural heritage goals and go through all of them and talk about how we can help achieve each one of them as cultural heritage professionals. So if you'd like to join us over there, please feel free. The website's right there. But basically, we're going to talk today just about a couple of the bigger picture items for our roles as conservators. So why does this matter to us? What can we do about it? And how can we start doing this? So I think most of us, obviously you guys are here, so you care about this, which I'm very grateful for. And it's always humbling to see how many people are interested in this topic. And, you know, it's not just because we care about our planet, but as conservators, we need to be caring about climate change and sustainability because it's really affecting our cultural heritage directly. Between the floods that have been more and more frequent in Europe in the past few years, and you know, social unrest in all parts of the world that has led to devastation of monuments and museums and cultural heritage. You know, I think we've all seen all of the issues that are going on that leads to destruction of our heritage. So we understand why we care so much, but how can we start making a difference? How can we start acting towards a more sustainable future? So one of the really easy inroads in this, and we in the Key Culture or in the Key Culture professional development courses, we talk a little bit more about the ways that we can start looking at the bigger picture questions. But today we're going to really focus on what we as individuals, as conservators, can do to start making change today. Because the most important thing we can do is start talking about it and start doing things. We're all about action. So what ways do we start thinking about sustainability? Well, obviously, I think most of us are aware of all of the toxic chemicals that we use, all of the waste that we produce, and the high energy consumption that we have as cultural heritage institutions. I think that, oh, sorry, this is another part. So I just really wanted to quickly say that, you know, down here at the bottom, there's a graph that shows a little bit about museum energy consumption. So this talks about, you know, how much energy we consume. And it's really important that we start thinking about this as well. And this is another thing we're going to be talking about today. So how does sustainability apply to conservation practice? Well, it's in the materials we use. I mean, all of the aspects about these materials, from the composition to the toxicity levels, to the proper disposal, recycling, purpose. Why are we using the materials we're using? But not just the materials, energy consumption. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But I think it's also really important for us to understand the successes, perhaps, that we have as cultural heritage professionals. And one of our roles is really in the social realm of sustainability. So we're going to touch briefly on that at the end of our discussion today. And then I think that some of the most powerful things that we can do is really utilize our skills, because what makes me believe that we as cultural heritage professionals have a unique advantage really to promote sustainability is because of the unique skill sets that we have. We come from art and science. We come from cultural heritage, so we have history and the future in mind. We have a really unique way of applying outside of the box creative thinking to our everyday issues in conservation that we can actually start applying to sustainability as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about you know, research and sharing our research, which is one of the biggest issues I think we have today, and how we can start doing that more. So as I said, energy is where we're going to start today because it's probably the biggest issue. And we may think, well, we're conservators. We don't really have a lot to do with energy. We can't, put solar panels on our institution or change our energy provider. But I think we all know that we are the ones that are telling these institutions, you need to keep your climate at this, and you need to keep your relative humidity here and your temperature here. So we need to start having these conversations a little bit more. This slide just shows a little bit about our energy consumption. In the United States, there are 35,000 museums, and they produce 12 million metric tons of carbon emissions every year. That's the equivalent of 2.6 million cars on the road every day for a year. And that's only the institutions themselves. That doesn't have anything to do with storage facilities or even embodied carbon, which is how much carbon it takes to build the museum, or the aspects of carbon that are included in our transportation, which of course art transportation as well as personnel transportation, so conferences and things like that. So we have actually a lot larger consuming institution than we think. On the left-hand side here, you can see a graph that shows a little bit about the energy consumption at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And you can see that the largest chunk here, that 29%, is actually just from their lighting. And the lighting in this one building in part of the Victoria and Albert Museum is the equivalent of 327 passenger cars driven every day for a year. So, and that's also the same as 256 homes use electricity for an entire year. And that's just the lighting for one building. So actually, we have a lot of places that we can make some improvements. I already said climate control. That's, I think, personally our biggest role is we need to find out what our institutions are using for their set points and for their ranges. Because as conservators, this was our initiative to say we need to be conserving our heritage better, and climate is a really great way to do that. If we can do preventive conservation, this is a really great way to ensure that our collections will last longer. That's terrific, but there often can be some miscommunications about what that means, and also who's making the decision on what climate control regulations we're using at our institutions. So if you don't know, I highly encourage you to find out what regulations you're using and see if that's actually necessary. The BESO protocol, the ASHRAE system, AICCM and AIC all recommend more lenient conditions than were thought to be more appropriate 30, 50 years ago. It's really important for us to, actually it was really 50 years ago, but it's really important that we start thinking about making changes in a way that is going to protect the collection, but also can reduce our energy hugely. So I very quickly wanted to go over just a couple of tips for everyday consumption reduction. One thing that I never knew about was this thing called phantom power. And this is something that basically when you have an appliance that is plugged in but turned off, it can still consume energy. And it's a little bit tricky because not every appliance does this, but there are some that do. It's kind of easy to think about if you have your cell phone plugged in and it's charging. Well, when it's done charging, it doesn't just switch off, like energy is still being supplied even though it's fully charged. But this is true for a lot of different types of appliances. So one thing that you can do right away to start saving energy is identifying what appliances in your institution use phantom power. And a great way to do that is using a meter monitor. So a meter monitor you can get on Amazon for 20 bucks, and you plug it into the wall, you plug your equipment into that, and it'll tell you how much energy it's using. There's also an easier way, if you don't want to check, you can just use surge protectors, which are these power strips down here. And that's a super easy way to just plug all of your appliances in there and then turn it off when things aren't in use, and then that'll cut the power supply to everything. So there's a lot of really great ways to make very easy changes that already can save a lot of energy. In addition, this is kind of a big one that I always see every time I go into a lab. you have your fume hood, and that's where you mix your solvents. That's where you, pour out your solvents and mix your resins and adhesives and everything. And a lot of times the sash or the cupboard is left open. But there was a study done at Harvard University that showed that this is actually a huge energy consumer, and that if you leave your fume hood open, it can consume 3.5 times as much energy as a house. So a really, really simple, easy way to save energy right away is keep your fume hood shut. If it's not being used, keep it shut. And that's the easiest thing to do. We talked a little bit in the last slide about turning equipment or phantom power, but also just turning things off when they're not in use is very easy. But it is important for you to realize that in lab equipment, sometimes things need to be left on because it's actually better for the machine itself. So some FTIR machines, for example, the lasers are quite sensitive. So actually they can't be turned off because it will damage the machine. So check your manufacturer about that. But it's really great thing to do, an exercise, is to go through and identify what machines need to be left on, what need to be turned off, and which ones need to be unplugged or plugged into a surge protector and cut energy to. And Cardiff University put together a really nice chart that they hang in their lab that tells their students which of the machines need to be turned off, unplugged, or left on. So that way, everyone can get in the habit of doing those really nice things. And I'm very, very quickly going to just mention that digital carbon footprint is a thing. I had no idea that your email consumes so much energy, but if you'd like more information on that, please also come to our webinars. I'm just not going to have time to cover everything today. So, but think about your energy with simple things like your emails. Clean out your inbox. Very easy way to start reducing energy. So we'll talk more about that in some of our other webinars. But I wanted to also very quickly talk about waste materials. So when we talk about conservation, I think this is the easiest entry point for us, because as conservators, we see the materials we use and we see the waste that we're producing. This was absolutely my entry point into conservation and sustainability. I walked by the trash can one day and I looked down and I saw it was full of disposable nitrile gloves. And I thought, well, that's very wasteful. Can't we do something about that? So I started looking into it and I found there are solutions, but no one knew about them as conservators. So this launched me into starting SIC and then later Key Culture. But waste materials are a very tangible way for us to start thinking about our impact and start saving. So as I said, there are a lot of solutions. Please check out the SIC website for more tangible information about the glove recycling programs, what you can do with your dental wax, what you can do with cotton swabs, things like that. We've got a lot of really great tips and tricks in there. Unfortunately, we don't have time today to go into all of them, but just to let you know that you're not the only ones with these questions, and we do have some really great answers for you on our website and on our social media. One thing I did want to just mention is, because this is obviously, we talked about waste materials, we're going to have to talk about plastics. Plastics is the necessary evil. When we're talking about plastics, it's in a lot of ways a conservator's best friend and worst nightmare, because we use so much plastic, and there's a lot of issues, of course, with reuse and contamination and what can be recycled and what can't be recycled. But I just wanted to kind of back up, because the first question I often get is, can I recycle this? And when we're talking about waste materials, it's important to think about the 4 R's, not just recycle. So recycle actually is I think it's almost a misleading way to think about being sustainable, because actually only 9% of plastics in Europe and in North America get recycled. And it's really shocking because a lot of it can't be recycled. And actually, when we're talking about recycling, what we're meaning is a material that is then turned into something that is equally as valuable. But what actually usually happens is what's called downcycling, which is when a material is produced or transformed, I should say, into another material that is less valuable. So you have these three different levels of recycling, which is your material being produced into an equally valuable material, or into a less valuable material, downcycling, or into a more valuable material, which is upcycling. And as conservators, we understand polymers, we understand plastics. Most plastics cannot be recycled. Most plastics cannot be upcycled. Most plastics are usually downcycled, which means you cannot take a plastic bottle and turn it into a plastic bottle. It's usually going to be turned into a less valuable material because the properties change when you process it again. So it's either more permeable or more brittle, less durable in some way. So we actually need to be asking a different question. It's not, can we recycle this? It's, do we need it? Can we reduce the amount that we're using? Do we actually need to be using this? So refusing is the first one. The second one is reducing it. So can we reduce the amount we're using? So do we need to use it in the first place? If so, how much do we need? Can we reduce the amount we're using? Then it's repurpose or reuse. So is there some way that we can reuse this? Can it be cleaned off and used again? Can it be repurposed and sent to, a local school that can then use it for arts and crafts projects? Is there something else we can do with it? And then we can start thinking about recycling. So in terms of our everyday practice for recycling or for plastic use, we obviously have alternatives as well, which we can start thinking about. So this goes back to the refuse. Is there a way that we can actually start finding alternatives for plastics? And this is something that is still a really great discussion point, because there's a lot of different plastics and a lot of different options for reuse. Solvents is another big one that we often get, that we're often talking about, because of course the toxicity not only affects the environment, but it affects us as conservators. There's health and safety issues as well. So when we're talking about solvents, we're going to be talking about, is there a way to use a less toxic solvent, or is there a way to not use solvents? Is there a way to use solvents in a smaller amount, so reduce free solvent usage? And one other aspect that I think is really overlooked is water, because water is actually a very precious resource. And I live here in the Netherlands where we have a lot of water. So people don't think of it as a precious resource, but I grew up in Colorado where we'd have droughts every summer, and there were constantly forest fires. And, in South Africa, they ran out of water. It was just gone. There was nothing left. So we actually need to be very precious with our water. And not only because water is a scarce resource, but also because when you turn on the faucet, it takes a lot of energy to pump that water in there. So we have to start thinking a little bit more conscientiously about our water, and not only our usage, but also the way we maintain our systems. So are we dumping solvents down the drain? Are we polluting our water systems by cleaning our tools and then just flushing it into our sewage? How do we start thinking in ways that we can actually preserve our water systems and reduce the water usage? So I just wanted to give a couple of very quick tips here. Obviously being here today is the first big step. It's just acknowledging that we have a problem and starting to think about, all right, what can I do to solve it? So just being aware, being conscientious. Once again, going back to the 4 R's, do you need to use something? Can you get away without using it? So that refuse aspect. If you do need to use it, then how much do you need? Can you make it smaller? Can you reuse something? There's a concept in a circular economy called life cycle assessment. And life cycle assessment is a really, really great way to start thinking about materials. And I won't go into too much of the detail, but basically, when you're thinking about a product or a material, you also need to consider, where does it come from and where does it go? So how did it get here? Is it that it's shipping from China, where the material's harvested here? What is it made of? What is the carbon footprint that was used for manufacturing? And then of course, where does it go? We think, oh, if we recycle something, then we're good to go. But actually, that's not always the case. So it's very important us to think about not only the use of a material, but also where it came from, how it got here, and what's going to happen to it after we're done with it. So I don't have a ton of time, but I will very, very quickly go over a couple of case studies. So I think these are where we kind of see the sustainability in action. So in terms of gloves, that's almost always my first question is, we would love to recycle our gloves. We have a lot of gloves. We want to figure out what we can do with that. So there are a couple of different programs that you can use for recycling or biodegradable gloves as well. There's a Show a Best makes a biodegradable glove, and there are two programs that do recycle disposable nitrile gloves. One is the Kimberly-Clark Right Cycle program, and the other one is TerraCycle. In spirit of the 4Rs, there are also ways to use other types of gloves. I had a long talk with one of my participants from the professional development workshops about latex. Latex is biodegradable. It's much more sustainable than disposable nitrile, but of course, there's a health and safety issue there, and that's why it's not being used. But there are all other alternatives. There are these really great gloves that are bamboo, and so they have much more tensile sensitivity than the cotton gloves, but they're fully sustainable because they're made from bamboo. So they're of course biodegradable, but also bamboo is a great source of sustainable materials. So there are different alternatives for gloves, but if you're in a situation where you're using disposable nitrile gloves, you can recycle them. And the Kimberly-Clark Right Cycle program was what I implemented at the University of Amsterdam a few years ago. And basically the program takes the Kimberly-Clark gloves and then turns it into reusable plastic, which then gets made into things like patio furniture and construction materials. And it's a very, very simple program. If you're already using Kimberly-Clark gloves, that's the one catch, you have to use the Kimberly-Clark gloves. If you're already using them, you can start recycling today. Basically, all you do is go on their website, order a box. They'll ship you the box, you fill it up. When it's full, you send it off, or they come and pick it up, and then they recycle the gloves. So it's a very easy program to use, but you do have to use the Kimberly-Clark gloves. Now, the TerraCycle program is also very easy to use, and they will recycle any type of glove. The only problem is that it's not available everywhere in the world. I do know that it is available in the United States, and I'm pretty sure it's available in the United Kingdom as well. But it's also something that makes recycling quite easy. TerraCycle is a great company. They have a lot of really cool recycling schemes and programs, so I highly recommend checking them out. So when I was talking about recycling and plastics, this is a really great example of how you have to start thinking about what happens to your materials after they go away, after you dispose of them rather. So this is a case study that Elizabeth Bagley, who was the Director of Sustainability at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, told me about. And on Thursday evenings, they have a 21 plus, because in the United States, you have to be 21 to drink. So they have a adult themed night where basically they're reaching out to a new demographic. It's a young, fun audience, and they invite them into the museum, and they have bars, and they have DJs set up, and the kids can go around and have drinks and see the exhibits. And when they first launched this event, they thought, okay, well, what kind of cups are we going to use? Obviously, it'd be best to use reusable cups, but of course the cups can't go into all of the exhibition spaces. So they thought that's going to be a nightmare trying to get everyone to, find their cup again after they come back, after they're in an exhibition space. So what do we do? So they finally decided they were going to do compostable cups. So they got a biodegradable, it was a plastic made from corn. And what they did was they put a little green swish on it, and so everyone knew it was compostable, and they used that. And Elizabeth went over to her local waste processing center, and she found out that actually the composting processing that these cups were going to after they were being disposed of, they were not being composted, because the local waste processing center, when they had compostable materials, they would sell the compost to local farmers. And because bioplastics, including plastics made from corn, have no nutritional value, it was not welcome, basically, in the compost. So the farmers refused to take the compost that had the bioplastics in it. So it was actually left out, and the compostable cups were actually burned. So it was more sustainable, according to the gentleman at the waste processing center, to use the recyclable cups, because those would actually be recycled rather than the compostable cups, which were then being incinerated. So it was a really, really eye-opening experience to realize that it's not just about what we buy, it's also about what happens to it afterwards. So my biggest recommendation for figuring out sustainable ways and sustainable materials is to go down to your local waste processing center and ask them what happens to the materials. And Elizabeth and I have actually put together a form that can help you ask the right questions when you're down at the processing center. So it's a really great way to get to know a little bit more about what more sustainable choices should be, because that's what we need to be knowing, is what happens to these things after they're disposed of. So I see we're running a little short. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions and answers, but just really quickly, you can also get really creative. Once again, if you start going through those 4 R's and you think, okay, refuse, no, I can't refuse, I have to use it. Okay, reduce, cool, I've reduced it, I'm going to use this amount. Next one is reuse. So, reuse. So foam is one thing that people always ask me about. How, I've got all of these ethofoam cutoffs, I've got all of this polyethylene, what do I do with it? Well, I had a colleague who actually would collect the cutoffs and then make them into tiny little pieces and stuff them into a pillowcase and create her own cushions that then could be also custom made for different sizes for her conservation treatments. So really easy, very simple solution, and just a really cool way to also be creative with your repurposing choices. So one of the other things, of course, is not just the plastics, but it also has to do a lot with the treatments that we use. We talked a little bit about solvents and how we're looking for more sustainable alternatives. Well, there are a lot of really, really great sustainable alternatives out there, but more research is currently being done on some things and more development. This is, of course, where I think that we have the most opportunity to really start making a difference, because we are researchers, we're academics, we are conservators, we are scientists, we're artists, we have all of these incredible skills. And so if we can put that into focusing our research on more sustainable alternatives, I think that we can find things that are win-win-win, which means they're better for the object, they're better for us as conservators and our health and safety aspects, and they're better for the planet. So for example, there's this really great product. It's a sulfur reducing bacteria, which you can use to remove gypsum crusts from stone substrates. And it actually has a consolidating effect as well. It's completely non-toxic. It has no negative effects on the object. The only problem is right now you need a microbiologist to make it, because it's not readily available and it's not been commercialized. So can we put a little bit more of our research energy into developing these types of treatments and then make them available to practicing conservators? So that's what we're trying to do at SIC. Another thing that we're doing at SIC is really looking into green solvents. And this is a really interesting aspect because, of course, we want to figure out what less toxic alternatives are. And one of the good news pieces I have for you is that actually a lot of what we're already doing is using green solvents. Acetone and ethanol are considered greener solvents. But green solvents is still a new concept to conservation. So we're putting together a green solvents handbook, which will really outline what green solvents are, how we can apply them to conservation, and where we can look for more research opportunities. Same thing with gels and emulsions. We think of gels as a really great way to, and from a sustainability viewpoint, a really great way to reduce free solvent usage. However, there's a lot of situations where gels are not actually very sustainable. Emulsions are much more sustainable, but we're putting together, again, a handbook that will outline more about what is sustainable about gels, what is not sustainable about gels, and some sustainable examples and case studies and ways that you can use gels and emulsions in a greener way. So I very quickly wanted to kind of wrap up with this topic of social sustainability. I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, and I think that this is something really relevant to what's going on today. you know, why do we do what we do? As conservators, we are preserving our cultural heritage, but who are we preserving it for? We're preserving it for the people of the future. We're preserving it for our children. We're preserving it for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that. I think it's really important that we make sure that we realize why we're doing what we're doing. And if there's no planet, then there's not going to be any cultural heritage left either. So we really need to be conscientious about what we're doing and really make sure that we're addressing some of these really tough questions about social aspects. Once again, this is something that we cover in more depth in the Key Culture workshops. So I hope that you'll join us there so we can talk all about all of these issues. But I do want to say that I also think that social sustainability is something that, while some of the bigger picture issues like decolonization and repatriation are still very, you know, need more work, there are a lot of ways that we are already making huge strides and huge successes for sustainability in a social aspect. I mean, our jobs are to serve our communities, and we're there literally to be socially sustainable. We're there to educate, we're there to do outreach, we're there to connect, we're there to serve our communities and educate the world. And so we are really good at that. I think it's something that we should be proud of, and we should recognize that that's really a huge contribution to a sustainable future. And we're a huge part of that. And we are much more powerful than we think we are. So I'm going to wrap up. We have, of course, there's so much to cover and there's never enough time. So this is just a very, very brief overview of some little aspects about sustainability and how it might be applied to our field. But I just wanted to leave you guys with this idea of, okay, cool. So we know that we want to be more sustainable. How are we going to do this? First thing you can do is ask for help. That's what we're here for at SIC and at Key Culture, is we're here to help find solutions and ask each other. And don't be afraid to ask, because I can guarantee you every other person has the exact same question. So please speak up, ask for help, and let's find the solutions together. And of course, I think kind of the most important aspects is sharing your ideas and research, communicating, talking to each other, talking about sustainability. That is the #1 thing we can do already, is just bring it up, just address it, be aware of it, talk about it. If we don't talk about it, we're not going to make any changes. And until we start addressing this and making this an everyday topic of conversation, then nothing's going to change. So build on your existing success, find out what you've been doing right, be proud of that, build on it, and talk about it. So I think Ellie has mentioned that to everybody that we will have our resources available for everyone online. We'll put those in social media. You can also find them on the SIC website, and I think also on the ICON website, maybe. So I'll let Ellie decide that. But I would like to, of course, thank you guys so much for having me today. And I wanted to do a very short shout out. Key Culture is currently doing a fundraising campaign. We are collecting funds to fund us for the rest of the year, but we're going to be doing some really great events, including Q&A sessions with people like Jonathan Ashley Smith and Stephen Koob and Francis Morris. So if you'd like to join us for any of those events over the course of the next couple of weeks, please check out our social media. So, Ellie.
Great, thank you so much. That was really interesting. Lots of things to think about in there. Right, on to our questions. Let me just pull these up in a way that I can still see you. Okay. Thank you for the broad amount of information. Really interesting. I would like to ask you if you were the first organization that is dealing with sustainability and conservation in Europe stroke the world.
Oh, that's a great question. We are the first organization that is dealing solely with sustainability. So there's a lot of really wonderful organizations that are working on the topic. However, they are usually in context of a working group or a committee and not just fully focusing on sustainability in cultural heritage. There are some really incredible consultants who are doing work with it, but I wanted to start as a nonprofit organization because I wanted to just bring everyone together and help facilitate all of the great work that's going on. So we're the first official nonprofit, yes.
I'm really interested in alternatives to nitrile gloves. I saw in one slide biodegradable gloves. Do you know how long it takes to degrade? I think you talked about that a little bit, right?
Well, I didn't talk about how long it takes to degrade, so that's a good question. Yes, I do. Basically, how the Showa Best disposable, or the Showa Best biodegradable nitrile gloves work is that they have a certain microbe or a certain element in them that is attractive to microbes in anaerobic environments. So they will not biodegrade sitting on the shelf. They have to be in an anaerobic environment in order for this particular microbe to basically eat them. And then the microbe eats them and turns it into this biomass pulp. So we tested the Showa Best gloves at Cardiff University. We found them to be really useful. They are not available everywhere, but they are available in the United Kingdom. And the only problem with them is that they can be a little bit more expensive. Like, I think it was something like 50 pence more a box, something like that. So it's not ridiculously amount, but that was an issue in some institutions. So, but Showa Best, you can find the link to their website on our website as well. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Okay, speaking of cleaning, would you define laser cleaning as a sustainable method? It does reduce the amount of solvent waste, but is their production sustainable?
That's a great question. I love laser cleaning. I'm a stone conservator, so of course I love laser cleaning. I think that in terms of, is it sustainable? That's a great question because they use so much energy. I think that this is one of the issues that we have right now in terms of sustainability, is that we don't have the answers of, okay, this is sustainable and this isn't. You know, when I'm talking about gels, for example, it reduces free solvent use. However, if you start thinking about the life cycle analysis of all of the different materials that you need to make these gels, it's actually very unsustainable. So what we're working on at SIC, and this is something we're in talks with ICON as well as IIC and AICCM and a few other institutions, is to create an app that's going to kind of help us to figure out what makes something sustainable and what makes it less sustainable. Because also it's really difficult to say, because it also depends on, of course, what laser you're using, what institution you're in. I mean, do you have renewable energy? Do you have, you know, a dirty energy provider? So there's a lot of different aspects to it, which is why this topic tends to be quite overwhelming. So hopefully we're going to be finding the answer for that.
Yeah. Okay. Do you already see the effects of sustainability in some organizations where you have been, I guess, places that you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see, I worked at the Vatican last year, and I was incredibly impressed with the initiatives that they've put in place. Every conservator I talk to, they are always talking about green ways of conserving, green alternative materials. They actually, this was one of my favorite stories, is the head of the Stone Conservation Department, which was my boss. He was asked about 10 years ago to clean the statues in the Pope's gardens. And because of course they had biological contamination. And we're talking about the Pope's gardens here, which are some of the rarest botanical collections in the world. So you can't just pour a quaternary ammonium biocide on top of that, because you'll kill the entire, you know, all the species living there. So what he did was he started doing some research. He got the Vatican research, the scientific researchers on it, and they came up with a biocide that's based on essential oils. And they used it for all of the Pope's gardens, and they use it in all of their treatments now. They've been using it for 10 years, and it's had amazing effects. And so this is where I think that communication thing and sharing your research is so incredibly important. And Guy Devroux, who's the kind of the guy who initiated all of this, and my boss, he's also on our honorary committee for SIC. He's very into the sustainability aspects. You know, I asked him, I said, well, why isn't this published? Why do I not know about this? Why, you know, I was doing a biocide treatment 2 years ago, and I would have loved to know. And he said, it is published, but it's published in Italian. So this is where I think that we need to start looking at breaking down some language barriers and some communication barriers so that we can share our research globally and find solutions together.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's a constant challenge with this field in terms of finding all the relevant research, especially when there's lots that are in proceedings and stuff like that that maybe aren't available online. It's yeah, there's just so much. And in terms of when they're put into other journals, say like other specialisms, they're just scattered all over the place.
Yeah, and that's what we're working on with the resource center, is bringing everything in one spot so that we can actually find it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Okay, next question. Do fume hoods still waste a lot of energy if they are not on but still open?
If they are not on, then then it depends on the one, I guess. It's a really good question. So you would have to check. Once again, the meter monitor is the easiest way to do that, because unfortunately not every fume hood works the same way. It's the same with appliances. I mean, I have a coffee machine, you know, in the United States that still consumes energy when it's plugged in but not on. But then it's, you know, the one I have here in Europe doesn't consume energy. So it depends, and that's kind of an unfortunate answer. You can ask the manufacturer, you can look at the instructor manual, or you can get a meter monitor. Obviously, you know, turning them off is really helpful, but turning, you know, some institutions don't allow you to turn them off. I've learned that. So just make sure that you always keep them shut at a minimum. But yeah, I would check with your either facilities manager. That's a great person to get to know, by the way, and they're always looking for sustainable solutions. So very nice to make friends with him or her. And I would say check the user's manual.
Okay. Does the contamination of nitrile gloves with our conservation chemicals make it difficult to recycle or biodegrade where possible?
This is a great question, and one that I have been asked a lot. Basically, from what I have understood from the Kimberly-Clark recycling program and from TerraCycle, is that our chemicals and our residues do not deter them from being recycled. So it's basically all they're looking for are biohazardous materials. Like these companies are used to working with like pharmaceutical companies. So if there's like blood or something like that on them, then they can't be recycled. But from our work, none of the residues that we have on our gloves and make them ineligible for recycling. So that's not a problem.
Okay. Could you please elaborate more on the biocide alternatives, especially the use of silver particles? As a preventive conservator, I'm currently focusing my research on IPM, and I'm looking for more sustainable strategies on the topic.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great question. So the biocide alternatives is really for removal of biological contamination on stone, or I think on other materials as well. But I do know that they also have been using essential oils in some IPM situations. I know that, for example, peppermint oil can be used to deter, I think it's silverfish, but don't quote me on that. Off the top of my head, I know that there are some really interesting strategies for sustainable alternatives for IPM. And what I would suggest you do, because that's not particularly my area of expertise, but I do know that one of my team members on SIC is really, really interested in this topic. So if you could please either ask on the SIC forum or send us an email, then we can get you all of the resources that we have.
Right, I'm going to invite Natalie in to join us. I'm just conscious of the time, but yeah, if Natalie wants to join us, I think she's got a few questions for you.
Great. Hi, Natalie.
Hi. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for the really interesting talk. Yeah, practical tips are great. Yeah, I asked Ellie if I could hijack a Q&A spot. I wanted to ask you a question that's been on my mind, and potentially those in the audience as well. So thinking about the current situation we are in due to COVID-19, there are several pieces of international guidance available that are promoting the use of PPE to reduce the risk of viral transfer, as well as increasing outside airflow, which of course might have cost implications. So do you have any advice for us who are working within institutions or studios who would like to continue to follow, or perhaps start striving for more sustainable conservation practices when we go to work, you know, during this COVID-19 pandemic? I'm thinking things around like potential increased use of PPE, the issues of recycling PPE where there's potential contamination, and around the use of repurposing materials as well?
That's a wonderful question and incredibly relevant. So thank you so much for asking that. My advice is stay safe. That's obviously the most important thing right now. Everyone needs to take care of themselves and take care of each other. Personal protective equipment is there for a reason. It is there to protect us. And this is the most important thing that we need to keep in mind. I think that, you know, when I'm talking about sustainability in terms of glove usage, or, you know, in this case, a lot of things are going to be talked about masks, you know, it's why are we using them? Well, obviously, if we're using them to prevent the spread of a pandemic, that's a pretty high priority. So let's keep using them. I think that it's really important that but you know, maybe when this thing all cools off and we go back to not needing as much protection for our own health and safety, but then we have to start thinking, okay, well, why are we using gloves now? Why are we using masks now? Is it for health and safety reasons? Is it because it's a habit? Is it because, you know, but I think that this is a really interesting opportunity for us to learn about these things and really take them seriously about, okay, why are we using what we're using and what is the purpose of this? So my advice would be that, you know, use PPE right now. Obviously, that's very important. From all that I know, I don't think that there's any issues in terms of recycling PPE with that, even if it's been in contact with a virus. And my understanding is that it is not a situation where it's transferable after a certain amount of time. But obviously, I think everyone needs to be very conscientious about this. And I think that I'm not probably the person to ask when it comes to, you know, the health and safety guidelines. I think it's more important that you talk with either your institution and follow their health and safety guidelines. But when it comes to sustainability, my biggest thing is that what we do is we learn from the lessons that we've gotten or received in the last few months. You know, a lot of us are going to be going back to work, but maybe we start thinking a little bit more about, do we need to be in the office 5 days a week? Can we work from home, you know, to mitigate our carbon footprint of travel? Do we need to be going to conferences as much? We're all here attending this webinar today, and it's been amazing. And I think, you know, we have the digital resources to do that. So I think that this is not necessarily, I mean, obviously in terms of PPE, we're going to start seeing an increase of use, but maybe we'll start seeing a lot of decreases in other places that actually have a larger impact. So in this, I'd say it's about picking your battles and picking the ones that are going to have the biggest impact while still adhering to your health and safety regulations. That's the most important part.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to kind of take stock, isn't it? Because I think obviously you should use the PPE that you need, but I think we probably are all a bit guilty of just out of habit using stuff, or not necessarily using it in the right way. You know, when you see people put on gloves and then use it all day long, and it's like, that doesn't really.
Yeah, what is the point? What is the point of that? I mean, you're touching your hair and then you're touching the object, and you're like, the whole point is to protect the object, but now it's got the oil in my hair from it. I think that we just need to be more conscientious about it. And I think we will be. I think that, you know, this has shown us that PPE is there for certain reasons. And it's also, you know, more valuable these days because, you know, we had a shortage for a very long time. And, you know, so we really need to just be more conscientious about it.
And I think you're right as well. I mean, the impact on how much it's necessary to travel and things like that. I mean, it's just incredible. I was laughing the other day because my, I don't know if you get on Google, it'll give you like it'll email you a timeline of what you've done. And my January was nuts. I went to all these places. I got the April one, and it's like literally these maps of me just walking up and down the seafront here, and like that, it gives you like highlights of where you've gone. And mine was like Morrison's and the Co-op. Just the funniest thing going back and looking through, and I was like, you're right, you know, it's not, there's some things that aren't quite the same, but actually loads of people have adjusted to doing stuff like this. And I certainly know there's lots of journeys that I was doing that actually, now thinking about it, I really didn't really need to. It was just habit. So
yep, absolutely. So yeah, I really hope that we're going to be able to take some of the lessons we've learned and apply them to how to think more sustainably about our future. Yeah. Right.
I think we will leave it there on that note. Thank you again so much, Caitlin, for joining us on our talk, and I hope you all enjoyed that. Thank you for all your questions. Like I say, this will be available soon. I'm not sure when, but relatively soon on the website. So if you want to go back to it or want to recommend it to other people, just actually one quick thing. This is interesting. Somebody's commented in the chat box. There are now some reusable, washable breathing masks available online. They don't have a link to hand, but maybe if people are interested, they could give that a Google. So it's an ever-changing thing, isn't it? So it's just
Absolutely.
yeah. So anything we come across, we'll post it. And yeah, okay. So thank you very much. I hope to see you all again soon. In the meantime, take care. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.